And to find out more about Latin America's political shift and its economic impact, we want to bring in Laura Carlsen. She's joining us from Mexico City. She is the Director of Latin America Rights and Security at the Center for International Policy. Laura, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
The election of Peruvian President Pablo Kuczynski, a former investment banker, marked a real shift from the left to the right, and we understand paved a way for a wider shift in Latin America. But as you know, there's been this political pendulum that's been shifting back and forth since the 80s in South America. What will be different this time around in your estimation?
It's hard to say how long this will last, because what's happened is not just an electoral shift, but of course, in the case of the largest economy, Brazil, there was an impeachment, and the right came to power through that process, an impeachment in May, and they came to power in August with the promises of improving conditions and eradicating corruption. They're still mired in corruption, and economic conditions have not improved there. With the election of Argentina, another major economy, people also expected the economy to improve. And now, after a year in power, Macri has not been able to attain that. We have high inflation, and there's a very high unemployment rate as well. We're already seeing protests in the streets. So there's deep division within Latin America. It's going to be very difficult in the coming year for these right-wing governments that have come to power to consolidate on the basis of improving the economy. Not only do they have power conflicts within their country, but they also have a number of external circumstances, like the price of commodities and oil, that are working against them.
In Brazil, they even had a boost from the Olympics. What would turn their economy around at this point, Laura?
It's very difficult to say, but what we can say at this point, even though they've only been in office for a short period, is that so far the radically neoliberal policies that the Temer government has put into place are not working. The freeze in government spending that will supposedly go for 20 years now is likely to cause more stagnation within the economy. We're seeing Brazil now in one of the deepest recessions in decades. The interest rates that are very high are also denying the government of an important point of stimulus for the economy, and then the cut in pensions have caused many people to face rising conditions of poverty, to the extent that the United Nations rapporteur is calling this an attack on the poor. So not only do we have a situation where the economy is not improving, but we're likely to see greater polarization because of how they came into power and the divisions and the corruption scandals that continue there, as well as more social conflict.
Laura, in Venezuela, as you know, a tragic humanitarian situation there. It is so sad, the poverty and the crime. Many believe it's on the brink of a civil war. Hugo Chavez, some people say, destroyed the oil industry, obviously. Are they any better off with Maduro now? And what will pull this area out of decline? Is another nation going to have to step in here?
Well, it's clear that they're not better off. The country is in a deep political and economic crisis. The fall of oil prices originally detonated the crisis, and then there was a political crisis with the rising opposition that took control of the National Assembly, which means that governance with the National Assembly at loggerheads with the president is very, very difficult there. Right now, the only point of hope that we have is that there is a dialogue process going on, and it appears that neither side wants to have an open war or violence at this point. Maduro saved himself from a recall referendum by putting it off in a way that many people felt was not transparent. And that means that the opposition now does not really have the same interest in pushing a recall, because under the Constitution, his vice president would take power, and there's not that much to gain politically since he names that person. In terms of the economy, what needed to happen should have happened a long time ago, which is clearly a diversification from the oil industry into a more solid, productive base. For that to happen now in the middle of a crisis will be very, very difficult. So it will be a critical year for Venezuela.
Looking at the Chinese investment in South America, do you expect to continue? And which countries do you think China will focus on?
With China, they just made a trip to the area in November and put out a new policy paper on Latin America. And instead of focusing on individual countries, the strategy is to create more integration within the region and to move toward a free trade area of Asia Pacific and toward integration. And they're trying to work specifically with the community of Latin American states. They already have bilateral free trade agreements with a number of countries. The idea is to open up more. Most of the investment, 90% of investment, has been concentrated in extractive industries and raw materials up to now. And that's been criticized because it creates a situation in which Latin American countries don't necessarily develop the way that they need to. So what the strategy now is to look toward, on a regional basis, investing more in infrastructure, which links up some of those industries as well as a greater manufacturing base, and also, of course, facilitates exports and imports across the region. Right now, that's what they're looking at. There's been a small contraction in investment because of the recessions and the global conditions, but they continue to consider Latin America a strategic region and will continue to invest there.
Laura Carlsen with the Center for International Policy, thank you for joining us live from Mexico City.